Before we continue, understand this podcast is for adults only and refers to relationships and activities between adults which are voluntary and consensual. If you or anyone you know is being abused, coerced, or violently aggressed against, please reach out for help to the appropriate authorities. Listening to the Gorean Voice podcast. Each week I explore a topic from the Gorean novels which I personally find interesting, or an aspect of living a Gorean inspired, or Gorean adjacent lifestyle here on Earth. Tal, hello and welcome. Gorean Voice, episode 28, Acquiring and Collaring Kajirae. This episode is really intended for the male listener. Lasses, if you'd like to listen, you can. But today's a great day to go outside and get some fresh air instead. It'll be an hour of your life you can never get back. So on this happy Sunday morning, I'd like to mention a few words about how a man may actually acquire or collar a Kajirae. In case this is your first listen to my humble little podcast, Kajirae is a word in the Gorean language of John Norman's Gore series of fantasy sci-fi novels, and the word means slave girl or female slave. So, first let's have a quick look at how things are done in the books. First of all, it should be noted that while on the planet Gore, female slavery is not universal or even ubiquitous, it is universally accepted by nearly every Gorean society. It is also worth noting that on Gore, enslavement of women is regarded as something of an ideal, which is naturalistic and beautiful, and promotes a depth of connection and union between a master and a slave girl, which is unattainable between equals among its other upsides. One might even meet a few people here on Earth from time to time who agree with this overall sentiment. On Gore, there are a variety of methods by which women find themselves in steel. Regardless of how a woman first comes to be collared, the harsh customs of this world recognize this state of hers as legitimate, and the various societies on Gore make no attempt whatsoever to emancipate women in any way, and in fact will even exercise city-state level power to enforce this bondage upon the enslaved. That is not to say that a collared woman will never again know freedom. Her master or owner could choose to free her, which is frequently done in order that he may marry her, though on Gore the concept of marriage is somewhat different to our earthly ideas about matrimony. It is called free companionship, and takes the form of a renewable contract. She may be ransomed by her relatives if she was a high-born lady so-and-so, or she may even be freed by force of arms by members of some faction to which she belongs. In a few cases, one example from Book 5 comes to mind, a girl may be freed after having rendered extraordinary services to the city-state or the city-state's rulers. In Book 5, a slave girl who works in the public baths, and who overhears and makes note of much useful gossip, etc., which is connected to the overall political/palace intrigue of the novel, earns her freedom by way of the intelligence she collects and dispenses to the faction who comes out on top in the coup. So the collars have come off in a variety of ways in the novel, but today we're here to find out how they come on. Let me count the ways. For one thing, to the victor go the spoils seems to be one of the few rules that is universally respected on planet Gore. More than a few women find themselves rendered into chattel as booty. Their city or some smaller group they are a part of, such as a clan, family, or traveling band, etc., comes under direct military assaults. Their menfolk are killed and they are carried off. This method of acquiring women was quite fashionable on our planet a few centuries ago, though its obsolescence has been gradual and uneven, and in some parts of the Near East and North Africa is not yet complete. Apparently, plenty of slaves are born in captivity. However, the author spares us most any details about the first 18 years of such a girl's life. He does imply that there exists some strict differentiation between the moral status of such a person before and after they are 18, but most of the details don't make it onto the page, which is probably for the best. More than a few of the female slaves in the book are Earth Girls, females abducted from Earth, either by the Priest King's faction or by the Kuri faction. These lasses, of course, learn the harsh ways of Gore while undergoing a massive cultural shock, and a few female protagonists have this as their backstory. On Gore, such slaves are referred to as barbarian women, and sometimes fetch a higher price, on account of the niche interest and pleasure of taming such a barbarian. Many of the city-states have some pretty harsh laws on the books, some of which resemble 3 strikes type laws, which enslave the female perpetrator upon her 3rd transgression of theft or some other offense. If this last bit sounds a little on the misogynistic side, note that men who make repeated transgressions are simply slain. From time to time, a lone actor, usually a tarnsman or someone similarly mobile, will simply and swiftly set upon a woman, bind her, and spirit her away. These spontaneous captures are risky ventures, because generally there are other men-at-arms about who may object strenuously and violently to their womenfolk being carried off. They are also risky because the abductor may be unsure of his target. Unlike buying a girl at auction where the goods may be inspected, he may be risking life and limb to acquire a girl whose shape is not pleasing to his eye, nor her note pleasing to his ear. It's of course worth noting that the nearby men who pose a danger to the abductor generally don't object to abduction on principle. They just don't want it happening to their own female relatives or chattels. Somewhat more interesting are the situations where some flavor of honor or custom demands that a woman be collared. This concept, while it's described variously in the books, has several examples, and one passage that stands out to me from the earlier books is a description that a woman's own family will dress her in slave livery and present her to her new owner, should some issue of honor be otherwise threatened. Which brings me around to the most interesting way in which women are collared on Gore. When there is a man who a girl finds charming, interesting, attractive, etc., she will find a way to get into his collar. While simply kneeling and begging for it will accomplish this task, many prospective slave girls have more pride than this, so they will artfully engineer a situation by which custom demands he collar her. Note that many of these customs give the man the alternative of killing her. I doubt this option is ever exercised outside of some intrigue or deception. Gorean men may see women as their things, but they are not keen to waste nice things. So the girl will commit some small transgression, or manage to contrive some situation in which she ends up owing her pseudo-savior a life debt. And well, I guess there's nothing to do now but kneel at his feet and beg to be collared rather than slain. Now she's a helpless collared captive rather than a kneeling, desperate little strumpet. What's left of her pride is intact, and she's exactly where she wanted to be anyway. Things don't always sort themselves out so neatly. I'm sure plenty of Gorean women have had their little designs go astray, and rather than happily kneeling at the foot of their chosen handsome young man, end up being bound and hooded, shipped off to the slave markets of some distant city, to end up chained in the scullery which belongs to a man who is handsome after the fashion of Jabba the Hutt. But such are the harsh ways of Gore. They play for keeps. I refer to this method as the most interesting, not because it highlights the subtle social agency available to women even as direct intervention in their own lives is severely limited. I think it's the most interesting because it's also the most relevant to how Earth girls manage to get their throats securely banded. It's also the most relevant to any Earthman who may be listening who are interested in having a girl in their steel in the near future. Also, since being a freebooting conqueror, acquiring slaves from a breeder or at auction, enlisting the help of aliens to abduct women, collaring repeat shoplifters, or simply abducting them oneself or demanding to her relatives that she be turned over to your custody such that this transaction may expiate some shame or dishonor. Since these have all fallen out of fashion and they're also generally quite illegal at the moment, the only means left to a prospective master is to have a woman kneel consensually and beg the collar of her own accord. Which is just as well. The fact that nearly any able-bodied man could wrestle nearly any woman to the ground, bind her and collar her, is just another boring fact. We must use our minds here, rather than muscle mass. So let's make lemonade out of these lemons in particular. The fact that there are now nearly zero social institutions which codify women belonging to men means you get to choose which cultural influences you wish, and essentially write up a bespoke constitution for your relationship. One may adopt spiritual practices from California, codes of dress from the Near East, speak the language of the pharaohs, pray only to Quetzalcoatl, and eat only vegan, kosher, Korean, Cajun fusion cuisine. One needs not be limited by the real world here either. This podcast is essentially dedicated to living a lifestyle which is substantially informed by a fictional culture on a fictional world. Best not let the truth get in the way of a good story or of a beautiful life. So, if you've listened this far today hoping for detailed instructions on handcuffing technique, or which knots to tie, or a numerical list of the best dark alleys to lurk in sorted by zip code, you'll be disappointed. The means by which a man may have a woman kneel at his feet are strikingly similar to those by which a man may convince a woman to spend time in his company in any relationship. The woman is looking for competence, capacity, and strong genes. Since these may not be inspected directly, she must settle for guessing them based on proxy indicators, such as confidence, displays of accessory sources, and an aesthetic presentation of the body in terms of dressing, grooming, and physical fitness. There are resources all over the internet which purport to teach techniques used to make men much more successful in attracting women. I'm happy to disappoint you again if you're searching for that. While those resources can teach a man a thing or two about statistics and encourage him to get over approach anxiety, the thing that the pickup guys know, and which the good ones try to impart, is to basically become a better man. Please don't ask a woman what that means. She'll know in a way, but can't really tell you. Women will sing you some lyrics about just being yourself, or being a good man, and they'll find a way to use the word consent about 7 times in a sentence. Definitely don't ask your mom. You can, briefly, cautiously, check out what the nihilistic, black-pilled doomers have to say on the topic. They'll show plenty of evidence that the smartest play is to choose your parents well. Make sure you're over 6 feet tall, are muscular. See to it that you end up with a deep voice, and it's always a wise move to come from a wealthy background. The black pill guys are right about those things. And like I said, they can point to statistical, not to mention YouTube anecdotal evidence of women choosing mates on the basis of very narrow criteria, which consists mainly of immutable, unchosen characteristics and accidents of birth. What they're wrong about, of course, is their prescription. Cynicism is just the very beginning of wisdom, but not the end. Black-pilled guys are plenty cynical about female entitlement, female misapprehension of demographic statistics, etc., but they are not nearly cynical enough about their own cynicism. So please, brothers, if you feel drawn to learning a little from the pickup guys, or the black pill doomer guys, make sure you're learning something that is both true and useful. They may have some true or even interesting things to say about female preferences in the dating/mating marketplace, and learning their terminology can make things easier to simplify and classify your own efforts, prospects, etc. But you absolutely must not end there. So what is a lad who wants more women in his life than he currently has to do? In a way, it depends who you are. If you're listening to this on a frozen army base high in the Himalayas, finding a way out of that area and resource acquisition is likely the best investment of your efforts. If you're a man who's on the verge of aging out of the dating market, you most certainly will have different priorities than a teenage boy who longs to hold a flesh and blood woman in his arms. Before I get to the list, I'd like to relate a personal story from a few weeks ago. One of the great pleasures in a man's life is mentoring other men who aren't quite as far along some path or other as oneself. A couple of weeks ago, a young man contacted me. He was a former music student of mine, and we'd kept in touch slightly over the years. He wanted to talk about life. He's in his 20s and found that his life wasn't going the way he wanted it. He found that his job wasn't enabling the lifestyle he wanted. He described a situation whereby he was working a little over 40 hours a week and didn't have as much time as he would have liked to play video games and eat at sushi bars with his friends. All of his friends were the same age and had the same hobbies of video games and drinking bubble tea. None of them had girlfriends or any sort of options for female companionship, and he had gotten somewhat overweight. Now, I didn't just break into some when I was your age castigation, but I did help him understand that not only was he not getting what he wants out of life, he didn't even know what he wanted or know what's good for him. Video games, sushi, and bubble tea, along with an occasional trip to a comic book or toy store? Why wasn't this man striving to make a dent in the universe and do something to move the needle on something that deeply matters to him? He wanted to have a woman in his life, and yet every aspect of his lifestyle, fashion, resources, and fitness level was utterly repulsive to all but the most tolerant females of our species. And lads, you don't want to be tolerated by your woman. Over the course of the next 2 hours I could spare him that day, I laid out the basics of masculine excellence to the extent he was ready for them. As it turns out, these basics of masculine excellence are identical to the aspects of a man which are attractive to women, so I'll be happy to lay them out here again in the form of some simple rules. So number 1, be a 10 out of 10 first. Now this doesn't mean that before you even consider dating, you find a way to become a 6'6" tall Italian surgeon who was also a count, a former tennis pro, and a part-time rally driver whose family owns a 1,000-acre olive grove outside of Palermo. I mean, that guy has women problems too. Of course I have problem with women. They are always around, chasing me everywhere. I can't get a moment of peace. What I mean by being a 10 out of 10 is that you need to be the best version of you that you can be. If you're not currently maximizing all of your aspects of life, what the hell are you waiting for? Fitness, finances, fashion. You will have certain limitations imposed upon you by genetics. To my short brothers out there, yes, it's not fair that you need to work 20% harder than me. So, work 30% harder and bring home the prom queen. There is exactly one man on earth who is the worst. The shortest, fattest, ugliest, stupidest, poorest, and least charismatic man alive. But you're not that guy. And it does neither him nor you any good for you to complain about your lot in life. If you've got time enough in your day to listen to YouTube videos, you've got time enough to do it while doing deadlifts. Throw your PlayStation out the window and download some audiobooks on finance, business, weightlifting, and 1 or 2 on how to dress. Step 1 here, becoming a much better man, is usually where men drop off. If you were hoping for a magic bullet, or some cool lines to use, or conversational hypnosis techniques, again, I'm happy to disappoint you. Becoming a better man comes dressed in overalls and it looks like work. There are precisely 0 shortcuts, but the next 4 items on the list are simple, but not easy roadmap. Step 2. Become dangerous. This may mean different things depending on your environment, talents, experiences, stage of life, etc. But if you want to have more options with respect to potential female partners, you must both demonstrate and imply that you are dangerous. Note, dangerous doesn't mean threatening. In fact, it means very nearly the opposite. Picture a man who is calm around people. He moves slowly, perhaps more slowly than anybody else in the room. The shape of his body indicates that he has spent countless hours undertaking physically difficult tasks. He may or may not have cauliflower ears or a misaligned nose. But above all, he does not give the impression that he was about to snap. In fact, from the way this man moves, his politeness, his magnanimous and warm demeanor, and perhaps the calluses on his hands, you get the impression that this man not only isn't about to snap, but that it would take a tremendous outrage to sway his face into a visible level of concern and have him set about moving his body in reaction. This man appears to be quite dangerous, and yet is extremely safe and unthreatening to be around. This man has a high degree of control over his ego and emotions, and this man is also the type of man which women are extremely comfortable around. How do you become such a man? Well, I wouldn't necessarily recommend that you sign your life away and join up with your country's armed forces as an infantryman, but that can work. There are methods a little closer to home for most of us. Join a boxing gym. Join a jiu-jitsu or Muay Thai or MMA gym. Put yourself in environments where there are physical consequences and fail a lot. I have some experience in these matters, and I can tell you that I've tapped out more times than I've seen sunrises. Compete. Step into the arena. It's a transformative process which leaves its mark on a man's body, but especially on one's ego. If you're at a stage of life, or have an infirmity which precludes participation in the more kinetic martial arts such as boxing, BJJ, Muay Thai, or wrestling, there are other ways to upgrade your sense of physical ease in your own skin. There are other martial arts with low or no contact, and there are internal martial arts such as Tai Chi, Qigong, and others, which deeply cultivate presence, physical mastery, and strength. Dance, yoga, marksmanship, and intense calisthenics may also change one's movements into the leonine strides of a master, rather than the haggard, shrinking, nervous, and wretched discomfort that so many men wear on their bodies. John Norman's books have plenty to say and imply about a man's martial disposition and capacity, and its effect on women. Nearly every romance book that women read features a hero who is dangerous, yet is safe to be around. So step 3, become fit. This is tied into point 2 above, as something of a necessary component, but it deserves its own point. Fitness is a visible sign of discipline, prioritization, hard work, and a demonstrable physical connection to reality. It is not necessary to look like Arnold Schwarzenegger or Frank Zane in their bodybuilding competition physiques, but let's be aggressively grateful for our health and this age of wonders which we are born into. Even without any concern for dealings with women, there's no good reason to neglect this part of life. I don't want to expand upon details or techniques. The internet has a ton of great material, but I'll share the following anecdote. I've always been in great shape myself, thanks to sports, discipline, and plenty of luck in terms of health, etc. So to some extent, my health is an unearned gift. I have a friend, however, who has walked around in a fat, out-of-shape, unhealthy body, and who later transformed himself into a specimen who looked like he was carved out of marble. He told me that the difference in the way people behave towards him is absolutely night and day. One of the great things about physical fitness is that it's basically free. Sure, you could spend plenty of money on clubs and equipment and such, but you can also just start doing push-ups and not stop until you look how you want to look and feel how you would like to feel. Well, step 4. Learn how to attire and groom yourself. Physical prowess and confidence and an aesthetic physique are great to have, but go best paired with some idea of how to dress. If you live in the tropics where you can visit a bank teller bare-chested wearing board shorts, then go for it, man. But for the rest of us, it's worth it to learn about the conventions for a white tie, black tie, business cash, and using cut and color to cultivate the optics of competent masculinity in the sartorial sense. It's also worth it to talk to men who understand the aesthetics of color and contrast and body shapes. If you have pale skin and dark hair, certain looks work better for you, which don't work for men with less contrast between their skin tone and their hair color. The same goes the other way. We learn about these things. The basics are quite simple. With respect to actually buying clothes, I know young men tend to shop off the rack these days, but try this idea on for size. I buy shirts, and I like to take my button-up shirts to a tailor. For a few bucks, he'll make each of them fit perfectly, so they feel as comfortable as pajamas, and look like they were made specifically for me by my own costume department. For a few dollars more, he'll customize pockets, etc., for the everyday carry items I carry so that they look and feel like they belong there. This is not a huge expense. With respect to suits or even formal wear, they can be easily acquired second-hand for a song, then customized and tailored for a few dollars. At the end of the process, you can look like $1,000,000 for $100 or less. In the Gorean cultures and the various earth cultures which John Norman based them on, men took pride in their appearance. Whether they were men-at-arms, making sure their every stitch was in place and every metal surface polished, or men of other castes whose pride in their craft, trade, or profession required that they present themselves to the world impeccably attired. Don't mistake this flavor of pride for vanity. Do indulge in something of the ritual of sartorial preparation for leaving the home. I'm not a samurai. As such, exquisite traditional robes are not suitable for the day-to-day. However, I can spare a moment or two to see to it that my belt leather and shoe leather match, make certain I'm properly suited and booted, whether in jeans and jacket or slacks and a blazer, before I let the world see me. And you won't catch me wearing exercise attire out of doors unless I'm actually exercising. With respect to grooming, much of this will depend on what you're working or dealing with. Men whose ancestry is anywhere along the line from the Mediterranean to the Indian subcontinent have to deal with more hair. They also have more hair to work with, and epic beards and exquisite mustaches can bring a look up to a full 10 out of 10. If your hair follicles aren't playing the same game as they did when you were younger, quit holding on to scraps and just shave that thing. Bald can be just as beautiful as a full head of hair, but neglect looks like heck on any man's head. Figure out cleanliness and body odor before you step out into the pitch, if you please. Men's olfactory concerns are generally 0 or 1. We don't care about the smell or something smells off. Women's are far more sensitive and capable of far more finely tuned discernment. Don't knock yourself out of the game before it even begins by smelling awful. Lay off the intense product as well. Fresh and clean will do the trick. Bumping up your fashion game a notch or two pays dividends in other aspects of life as well, especially in an era where many men dress like total slobs. 5. Resources and finances, etc. Figure this one out. You really shouldn't be dating if you're spending your last few dollars on the tip of the restaurant. This is obviously contextual, since living well in Zamboanga, Philippines is very different than living well in Los Angeles, California. There's another one which is wearing overalls and looks like work. Money solves problems. There are plenty of people who will tell you they don't care about money, that it's the root of all evil, etc. There are even a few women who will sing you those lyrics. Which brings me to point 6. 6. Don't listen to women. Now, I don't mean this literally. You don't need to carry earplugs with you in case a woman looks like she's about to open her mouth. What I mean is that women like to say things which sound nice and easy and comforting. They will say things like, "Don't worry about money or muscles or dressing well, just be yourself." Sometimes these are the women in your own family, your mother, your sister, etc., who want you to feel better in the moment if you're being hard on yourself, or if they see you working yourself to the bone. Don't listen to them, and please don't ask them for advice on how to meet women. Don't ask a deer, ask a hunter. Consider the following thought experiment. You have a twin sister, and you've both just attained the legal drinking age in your jurisdiction. You both head out with separate groups of friends for a night of clubbing or watching the game at a sports bars or something in between. The next morning, you meet up again. She would explain to you that bars are great. People are so nice they just buy you drinks and even food. You don't even need to bring money. All sorts of friendly people will offer you rides home, and everybody you meet is dying to add you to their social circle, either asking after your social media accounts or wanting your phone number. People with really nice cars, boats, and even aircraft are now offering you rides to interesting and exciting new places. I trust you can theorize just how different the young man's experience is from the young woman's. Number 7. Don't listen to women. Yes, point 7 is also called Don't Listen to Women. Above, I implore you not to listen to the women who are already in your life when they tell you to just be yourself. Now, with respect to the women who are in your attraction demographic or sexual marketplace, or however you'd like to call it, you must also not listen to them. To put it simply as possible, a woman may not tell you what she wants from you. This is because what a woman wants from you is for you to already know what she wants from you and to give it to her. This is a delicate part of the dance. Even in a purely fictional, theoretical Gorean context, women have the habit of getting what they want not by asking for it directly. Here on Earth, where women have, rights and they have all manner of agency and direct means of asking for exactly what they want, they still have the means of being more indirect, vague, etc. Consider when a woman says, "I will only date an X type of man." Well, it may mean that she's only interested in dating men of type X, or is only thinking about men of type X. What it usually means is the following translation. Quote, "I made a mildly aggressive, declarative statement that specifically excludes you. If you are dissuaded or intimidated by this statement, you are not the man for me." End quote. This is not to say that you can ignore women's verbalized preferences, and one must bear in mind that no is a complete sentence. However, it's worth remembering that many of the words which escape the lips of women are themselves tests, and most men fail most tests most of the time. Another test that's coming your way if there's a woman in your life is as follows. She'll say, "I want you to get me X. If you get me X, I will be so happy," etc., etc., etc. The real question is, quote, "Are you enough of a dork to be bossed around by little old me and get me the things I ask for when I ask for them? Because if you are, I'll slowly lose respect for you and eventually abscond with all those little trinkets as well." End quote. It's nearly always a test. Don't believe me? Ask a woman to state her dating criteria. Write a few of the key points down. Then after a few minutes, ask her about her previous partners. You'll find none of them match that criteria. The difference will astound you. This phenomenon of listening to the actions rather than the words goes on at every conceivable level, from the fundamental issue of finding a life partner to the apparently mundane task of selecting a dinner or entertainment venue. Pro tip, this mundane task is bloody important to keep the dance alive, and the often mumbled, craven phrase, "I don't know, where do you want to go?" is the least sexy 9 consecutive words to female English speakers. These last 2 points, please understand, are not to derogate women in any way. These are features, not bugs, of the human species, and understanding them won't just allow you to goose the algorithm a little bit, but more importantly, will equip you to make truly electric connections truly last. Which brings me to the next point. 8. The game never ends. There is no steady state. Men who believe that a relationship, having a solid foundation, may be left to its own devices, and that things will keep humming along of its own accord. This is not, and has never been the case. In days of yore, even when divorce wasn't on the table, men who let themselves get soft found themselves becoming hen-pecked husbands. Today, the less graceful phrase is, "She's not yours, it's just your turn." Vulgar as this wording is, it gets the point across. Even in the Gore books, in cases where women are literally property, there are circumstances, some of which are elucidated in Book 3, by which a collared and tethered woman may break her former master, and have him, tired and broken, be in the collar. This state is one where both the woman and the man have contempt for the man. You can't get lazy in terms of the dance. Romance, electricity, energy, connection, and yes, dominance must be cultivated in your relationship to keep her happily kneeling and looking up at you with love in her eyes. She will try to cut you down a little here and there, no more than about 1,000 times, per day, just to see that you're still man enough to wrest the knife from her hands, toss it into the fire, and carry her upstairs to teach your body or her butt, some manners. It's a game that every girl plays but can't stand to win. Even if slavery were legal and normative here on Earth, would you want to have a diluted, listless, disintegrated relationship with your property? Such a fate is cruel to the slave and to the master, and I would feel awful treating my dog that way. So number 9, don't get lazy. You will change. Your woman will change. But the moment you stop chasing excellence, the contempt starts to build on her part. We are not descended from women who could stand by as their men and masters sank into stupors. Our female ancestors knew how to swim from a sinking ship. Whatever phase of life you're in, if you're not moving forward in some way, she's going to start remembering urgent appointments elsewhere. Tie it into point 8. If you continue to hold yourself to a higher standard, you can also enforce higher standards and hold her to them. Don't want your wife to get fat? Don't get fat yourself. Keep your things polished and she'll keep house with pride and a smile until her dying breath. 10. Most importantly, be interesting. This is harder to do at 18 than at 38, but do something with your life. Would a woman that you find attractive want to insert herself into your activity, into your world? Thanks to online social networks, this can be easy to quantify. Surely you have some pictures of yourself online. Are you interesting in those pictures? Would a woman you fancy want to insert herself into that picture of you passed out on the couch? Or would she rather insert herself into a picture of your friend Chad, who is playing drums on stage with his band? Beef up your obituary a little bit before you get busy trying to get busy. The Dos Equis beer commercials, featuring the world's most interesting man, are corny, but they make my point in an over-the-top sort of way. A woman will move across the ocean, change religions, learn your language, and bear your children if you're interesting. You can do almost anything to a woman, except bore her. If you came to this little podcast by way of a general interest in a Gorean subculture, or from vetlife.com, you know that there are all sorts of subcultures that can be found and networked within thanks to the internet. It may appear to be a tempting shortcut for a man to get into a very specific subculture, such as Gorean, or some other kink-oriented group, or even enthusiasts of any sort, comic books, or pop culture fandoms, or geeky, nerdy subcultures, or other common interest type groups. Get into a place where there are women who will like me for my love of Disney or video games, etc. Hey, we both like Zelda, match made in heaven, and there's no pressure to become a formidable, dangerous, stylish, competent, capable, and interesting man. She'll like me for who I am, no pressure, etc. Why do all that hard work when there are women who say they like geeky, nerdy guys? Well, there's a couple of things to note. When women say they like geeky, nerdy guys, the geeky, nerdy guys rejoice and think they can go on being out-of-shape, slobbish video game addicts. What the women actually mean is that they'd like to do some of these geeky, nerdy hobbies with an otherwise interesting man. They mean they're down for playing video games with a hunk, or they'd be quite happy if their life partner was a high six-figure earning engineer in Silicon Valley who has a bit of a nerdy streak. If you're neither, don't hold your breath for some girl you play PlayStation with over the internet to show up at your door. Sooner or later, she's got to go outside and get groceries or something, and in that big blue room with the people in it, she's liable to run into a dozen interesting men per hour who are ready and able to take her someplace interesting. If you get bad results in real life, at the cafe, at the library, at the gym, at the park, or at school, you'll get bad results online too. But you'll be able to fool yourself into thinking you're doing all right, all the while ruining your posture, your vision, and your sleep routine. At last, though, I do have some secret sauce. You listen this far, it's time you get a little bit of my magic recipe. Simple 3-step process, results guaranteed or your money back. Step 1. Buy a motorcycle and learn to ride it. Step 2. Buy a second helmet. Step 3. Post up somewhere where the ladies are. Due to the content of this video, it's likely that you're going to start getting YouTube pre-roll ads for instructional videos or courses on how to meet women, etc. Please don't even bother. If you haven't made yourself attractive through steps 1 to 5, you'll be setting yourself up for disappointment. You may have noticed that this episode wasn't all that specifically Gorean. John Norman would certainly co-sign the truths regarding women that I listed. In fact, many of them I learned at a young age from his books. Gorean or not, a woman is a woman, and if she looks up at you with genuine burning desire in her eyes, she'll be happy and proud to wear your steel locked around her throat, even if she's never heard of gore. Most of all, please understand that these differences between how women and men relate to each other are beautiful things about our species. They are features, not bugs. It may seem from earlier in this episode that I make women out to be dishonest, duplicitous vixens. That's not the case at all. Men can be brutally honest with each other, and women can also be honest with men, but in very different ways. The shit test questions, rejection, and ghosting, etc., those are extremely honest communications. I have women and girls in my life who I trust, absolutely. I just don't trust them exactly the same way I trust my brothers. I trust them to be women. Please, if you take nothing away from this episode, let it be this. Don't hate women for what they can never be. Love them for what they are. They can be lovely indeed. Well, thanks for joining me again this morning. Lads, there is a piece of paper in your office which lists everything you're entitled to in life. You'll find it in the paper tray of your printer. Lasses, what are you doing here? I thought I said today's episode was for the lads. I'll have to do something about that. In a future episode, I'll be looking at the question of identity. Western cultures seem to be undergoing paroxysms of both confusion and feigned ignorance at once, while other cultures seem to show a very robust sense of their own identity. What insight do the Gore books grant us into the nature of identity? Is it true what I've heard, that when the jihadists take over Europe, and when the Chinese cyborgs make landfall on the West Coast, the soft Westerners will be arguing over their pronouns, even as they are disemboweled? However, pray join me again next week, where I'll get into the matter of having a martial disposition in general, whether or not one allows Kajirae to touch or handle weaponry. Every Gorean man was certainly not a warrior, but they all understood something of war. Are their sunny days all the brighter for knowing these darkest of storms? In the meantime, fair winds and happy trails.